If you're drafting these players, you're already in trouble. They may look safe on the surface, but the red flags are everywhere. And I'm here to make sure your season doesn't go down in flames before week 1. Let's talk about the players you absolutely need to be panicking on right now. And of course, we got to start with Rashee Rice. And the good news here is we got some clarity on his possible suspension. The bad news is it was terrible clarity. According to Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, the NFL wanted to suspend this guy for 10 or more games this season. They wanted to give him the Deshaun Watson treatment. Now, of course, Rashee Rice and the player reps were like, whoa, this is way too much. Now, we're going to arbitration with Sue L. Robinson. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because she was the same one who oversaw the Deshaun Watson case. Now, in that instance, she heard the case at the end of June and didn't make her decision until very early in August. So we're talking about a week 4 timeline here. She also favored, I guess, more in the favor of Deshaun Watson, because remember, the NFL wanted to suspend this guy the entire season. She said 6 games. What happened after her ruling? The NFL instantly appealed, and eventually Watson and the NFL agreed to an 11-game suspension. Now, admittedly, myself or nobody else actually knows how this is going to play out, but if we look at what happened with that Deshaun Watson case and use that to project forward for Rashee Rice, here's what we get. We know his case is going to be heard Tuesday, September 30th, which is the start of week 5. Now, if like the Deshaun Watson case, she needs 3 to 4 weeks here, we're talking about potentially week 9 before she makes a ruling. Then, of course, there's the fact that the ruling probably won't be as high as the NFL wants if the Watson case was any kind of precedent. Because again, they're asking for a big suspension here. So now we're looking at this potentially the NFL appealing. Now this pushes into week 10, week 11, which means he's almost certainly going to miss fantasy playoff games, if not the entire fantasy playoffs. And also think about this. The Chiefs know they need Rashee Rice for the real life playoffs. So if we're getting to later in the season, they might just tell Rashee Rice, hey, take your medicine, take the punishment, it's fine. We can win without you. We can get into the playoffs without you, but we need you healthy and ready to go for the playoffs. So he may, kind of like Ezekiel Elliott in 2017, just say, fine, give me my suspension. If you don't remember back then, Ezekiel Elliott missed weeks 10 through, I think, 15 that year with a 6-game suspension that he kept trying to push off. And finally, Dallas was like, dude, we need you in the playoffs. We don't care about weeks 10 through 15. We need you down the stretch and in the playoffs. That's the same thing that could happen here with Rashee Rice. I mean, almost certainly we're looking at least a 4-game suspension. If the NFL wants 10 plus, there's no way he's getting out with only 3 games here. We're looking at 4, 5, probably 6 or more, to be honest here. And sadly, they're probably going to come towards the end of the season when you need him the most. Whether you agree with it or not doesn't really matter. The optics of what Rashee Rice did are much worse than the optics of what Jordan Addison did, because there are no optics for what Jordan Addison did. Everybody's seen the Rashee Rice video, and the NFL just, for whatever reason, for PR reasons, takes that more seriously. Right or wrong, they do, and that is what is going to happen here. Rice is the ultimate wild card this season. Sure, maybe you draft him, maybe you get lucky and he's there for you down the stretch and in the fantasy playoffs, but that seems like the lower outcome probability here. The more likely probability is he misses 1, 2, every one of your fantasy playoff games, and nobody is worth drafting if they're not going to be there to help your team when it matters most. Now, injuries always suck for fantasy football, but especially when the quarterback is hurt, because that can oftentimes bring down the whole offense. And I'm getting very nervous about the Rams offense, and specifically Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, because Matthew Stafford right now is dealing with a herniated disc, and he hasn't been practicing. Even every time they say, like, yeah, we think he's going to be back next week, nope, doesn't practice at all. Now, they're still telling us what we want to hear. Oh, it's fine. He'll be ready for week 1. No worries here. But look, Sean McVay plays these games. We cannot trust Sean McVay with injuries. This is the same guy who downplayed Puka's knee injury, downplayed Kupp's ankle injury. I do not trust Sean McVay when it comes to injuries. Now, we do have 2 recent examples of quarterbacks with the same injury. Back in 2014, Phillip Rivers, one of the best Ironman quarterbacks of all time, played through this injury all season long, basically didn't practice all week, got pain injection shots, and played through it and was fine. The other instance was Tony Romo the year before in 2013 when he took a hit, herniated his disc, and had to have surgery, and it ended his season. Now, I will say between the two, Matthew Stafford is way more of an Iron Man than Tony Romo was. If anybody can play through this kind of pain, it's him. But the risk here, of course, is he's 1 hit away from having a situation where he can't play through it anymore, where he's out for the entire season. And if that's the case, this is bad news for the Rams, because the quarterbacks behind Matthew Stafford right now are Jimmy Garoppolo, Stetson Bennett, and whoever Dresser Wynn is. And yes, that is a real person. I did not make him up. And let's not forget, the last time Jimmy G and Davante Adams played together, he made Davante Adams so angry that he shoved a cameraman to the ground. And the last time we actually saw Jimmy Garoppolo take significant snaps, he was 31st in accuracy rating and 26th in deep ball completion percentage. This would be a major downgrade to both Puka and Davante Adams, and to a lesser degree, probably Kyren Williams as well. Now, I will say, I still do find myself pulling the trigger on Puka Nacua sometimes, depending on who is on the board. Like, if I'm very late in the first round and Neighbors, Christian McCaffrey, Nico, Amon-Ra St. Brown, if those guys are all gone, sometimes I just bite the bullet and pull the trigger on Puka. But I got to tell you, every time I do, I take a big gulp, and I am terrified to hit that draft button because I just have visions of Puka Nacua and Davante Adams running routes and getting throws from Jimmy Garoppolo that are completely uncatchable. And we do have one game where Puka played without Stafford, granted small sample size here, but in that game he put up a whopping 3 catches for 32 yards. Yeah, this is terrifying if we lose Stafford this year. This offense needs at least a good enough, healthy enough Matthew Stafford. If he goes down at any point this season, or if this back injury is just too much, this offense is going to go into the toilet. Sticking with injuries, one of the most strange injuries of this offseason has been Joe Mixon's foot injury. Remember, he was there in OTAs, minicamp, was fine, and then all of a sudden he shows up at the training camp and he gets put on the non-football injury list. So it's like, what happened between OTAs and minicamp and training camp to his foot? And nobody knows because the Texans are being unbelievably mysterious with this. Just saying things like, yeah, we're just being cautious. Like, yeah, we're hoping he'll be out there week 1. Like, what is going on here? This does not sound good. Let's not forget, they'd already drafted Woody Marks. They already had Dameon Pierce on the roster. Dare Ogundubuwe, sorry I butchered his name, but they like him. And then they went out and drafted 30-year-old Nick Chubb coming off 2 major injuries. This doesn't sound like a team who thinks Joe Mixon is going to be ready week 1. And look, I get it. Mixon was great last year. He finished 9th among running backs in points per game, but most of that was early in the season. From weeks 12 to 18, he only scored 11 or more PPR points in 1 game, and he had 4 games of single digits. Now he enters the season less than 100% if he's even ready for week 1. Look, if this was some proven stud running back like a Bijan Robinson, a Saquon Barkley, a Gibbs, a CMC, somebody like that, sure, take the chance. Say, hey, maybe if he misses the early part of the season, comes back, has a slow start, but he's ready, he's ramped up, fully healthy by the end, great, I got a top 3, top 5 running back. This is Joe Mixon. I mean, for as great as he was last year, it was only a portion of the season, early in the season. This isn't a guy who's historically been a top 5 running back year in and year out. And let's not forget, he's playing behind arguably the worst offensive line. In fact, Pro Football Focus has them ranked 32nd among offensive lines right now. I just think there's way too much risk here for Joe Mixon, especially when you can get guys like RJ Harvey, Isaiah Pacheco, Tony Pollard, others after him. Why take on the risk here with a guy who may not be ready to start the season? Honestly, we don't even know if he's going to be ready at any point this season. And if he is, he's not in a great situation running behind a terrible offensive line. I'm just out on Joe Mixon this year. Now, Chris Godwin was a player I thought was a great value for most of the offseason, but man, the word we're hearing out of Tampa Bay now is not good for his prospects as far as early in the season. Recently, prominent Bucs beat writer Scott Reynolds wrote, "The Bucs will be without Chris Godwin to start the season. I would be shocked if he doesn't start the year on the PUP list." Let's not forget, of course, he had that serious ankle injury last year, had surgery on the ankle, but then he had to have a cleanup procedure on the ankle, which I think is kind of the setback here. Plus, this is also giving rookie Emeka Egbuka valuable time with the starters in training camp. Well, not in preseason, the starters haven't played, but in training camp, which means he could be ramped up and ready to go from the beginning of the season. So if Chris Godwin's missing the start of the season here and Emeka Egbuka is playing well, Chris Godwin is coming into an offense where, look, I'm not going to say Chris Godwin's going to be the odd man out or anything, but there's already Mike Evans and Emeka Egbuka, and now he's got to come into this offense as potentially, into this 3-man committee. This is an offense that historically Mike Evans, Chris Godwin have had over 50% of the targets. If Egbuka is taking a significant amount of those targets, say 20% of them, it's going to hurt both guys, but I think it's going to really hurt Chris Godwin because he's not going to be at 100% to start the year. I will say, if there's any silver lining here, it's that his ADP has dropped. We're now seeing him go off consensus 87 in fantasy football drafts, but you can still get guys like Jacoby Myers, Matthew Golden, Ricky Pearsall, still go after him in consensus ADP. I think those guys, well, first of all, they're all healthy. Second of all, they have more upside than Chris Godwin this year. So as much as I like drafting Chris Godwin early in the offseason, I felt like he was a value. With the talk we're hearing about him potentially starting the season on PUP, coming off a major ankle injury, I'm probably just going to avoid Chris Godwin in my fantasy drafts. While I might have some optimism for Chris Godwin, I have no optimism for Brandon Ayuk this year. Look, Kyle Shanahan came out and said week 6, and everybody lost. Oh, week 6, we're going to get Brandon Ayuk back in week 6. But I don't think people actually read the quote here, because his actual quote didn't say week 6. It actually said, I always see them around week 6, which means that could be week 10. It could be week 5. But that's the area where I start thinking about it, which is a long ways away. So even Kyle Shanahan doesn't know. He's just saying week 6. It could certainly be after week 6. It could maybe be before week 6, although that seems very optimistic. But even if it is week 6, what are we really getting from Brandon Ayuk this year? You know, when he first comes back, he's had no training camp, hasn't gotten any conditioning, coming off a major injury to his knee. He's going to be slow played in. So you're probably looking at 3, maybe 4 weeks, maybe longer, before he's even close to playing his normal amount of snaps. Then there's the fact that he's coming off ACL injury. We know year 1 off ACL, guys just aren't the same. Juwan Jennings, if he's healthy, with or without a contract, I think is going to be out there. We know Ricky Pearsall is going to be out there. It's just hard to envision Brandon Ayuk giving us anything close to what we've expected from Brandon Ayuk, last year or even this year if you're drafting him, if he's even ever back to full strength at any point this season, which is honestly kind of unlikely. Now, I will say one thing about Brandon Ayuk. If you're in a league that has multiple IR spots and you want to draft them and stash them on your IR, fine. I think it's fine to do it. No guarantees that he's going to actually help your fantasy team this year. I don't think he's ever going to really help your fantasy team this year. But hey, there's no harm in stashing him on the IR. But if you're in a league with no IR spots or only one IR spot, you're going to probably need that spot at some point this season. And you can't have Brandon Ayuk sitting on your bench, clogging a bench spot, doing nothing all year. So sure, if you got tons of IR spots, stash them. It's fine. But in shallower leagues without IR or with only one IR spot, you don't need to draft Brandon Ayuk. Whoever drafts him in your league is probably going to end up dropping him anyways. So when he gets close to returning, you can just grab him if you really want to. Now, Bills wide receiver Khalil Shakir had a nice year 3 breakout last year, went over 800 yards, scored 4 touchdowns, was a wide receiver 33 in points per game, and many people, myself included, expected him to get, better in year 4. Not like a massive jump, but at least get better. But now I'm kind of just finding myself not even drafting Khalil Shakir because he's dealing with a high ankle sprain. And here's the thing about high ankle sprains. First of all, they generally take 4 to 6 weeks to heal. So right there, we're talking about he's missing at least 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks of the NFL season. But then what we also see is it's not like they come back and it's just fine. Usually they need a few more games to get that ankle back up to speed before they're even 100%. So now we're talking about Khalil Shakir maybe week 5, maybe week 6 before he's 100%. And again, we're talking about a guy who finished wide receiver 33 in points per game. Are we really expecting this guy to make such a massive leap this year that he's a top 24 wide receiver, top 20, top 15 in this Bills offense that spreads the ball around and he's missing camp and things now? I don't think so. Like, Khalil Shakir is fine. He's a fine flex start in your PPR leagues. He'll give you some weekly upside, but really, what are we getting here from this guy? Is this really a guy with a high ankle sprain, which we know is an injury that takes a while to heal and then lingers after they come back? Do you really need Khalil Shakir on your fantasy team? Like, were you going to look back on the 2025 season and be like, that was a league-winning pick for me? I don't think so. Khalil Shakir is fine when he's healthy, but he's not healthy right now. And if you watched our draft mistakes video, we even said there's no reason to draft guys who are injured going to the season, especially guys like Khalil Shakir who aren't difference makers in fantasy. So I'm just passing on Khalil Shakir. I'd rather take chances on other wide receivers or running backs on the board in that range. I don't need to draft a guy who's probably not going to be healthy to start the season, might need time to ramp up, and doesn't really give me a ton of upside anyways. And then finally, I was really high on Justin Herbert this year. I thought he could be one of those, forgotten quarterbacks, that sneaky top 10 upside, behind a good offensive line, good pass catchers. And we're going to see him run the ball more this year. But then they lost star offensive tackle Rashawn Slater. And look, I know there's still good players on this offensive line like Joe Alt and others, but man, this is a big blow. Because according to Rich Rebar on Twitter, last year the Chargers ran 159 plays without Slater on the field. And on those plays, they ranked 27th in yards per play, 29th in success rate, 32nd in yards per carry, 32nd in rate of 10-yard plays, and 24th in rate of 20-plus yard plays. I mean, it's hard to overstate how big of a blow this is to the offense. And honestly, I think it's a big blow to Omarion Hampton and Najee Harris if he gets on the field as well, because, again, losing one of your best offensive linemen is going to hurt the run game. And the thing with Hampton is he's been flying up draft boards lately. He's now going as a consensus RB17, which I think is kind of crazy because Najee Harris is actually back on the field doing drills. Granted, he's not practicing yet, but he's got a helmet on. He's doing drills, which means his eye must still be there at least, and he should be able to see. And again, they just lost one of the best tackles in all of football. And of course, with Justin Herbert, this likely means more under pressure time, quicker throws, having to get the ball out before he wants to, which I think is still okay for a guy like Ladd McConkey who isn't going to, thrive on those deep routes, those deep balls. But it's not good for Justin Herbert here if he's just dinking and dunking all game like Tua because he has no time to throw. So as high as I was on Herbert as like a afterthought quarterback that could potentially win your league, now I think he's probably just going to be more of a streaming guy in good matchups. And I got to tell you, I think the Hampton steam is getting a little bit out of control. Finding a hard time pulling the trigger on Hampton. This guy might end up legitimately being a second-round pick by the time we get to late August, early September. And I think with the loss of Slater, that is way too high. All right, so now you know some players you got to be panicking about, and maybe you want to avoid in your fantasy drafts, but you need to know way more than that if you're going to dominate this year. We got you covered, everything you need in our 2025 playlist right here.